Welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us today. Another week and more impeachment investigations, so we have the latest there. Plus, we're checking in on an international city with absolutely unbearable air pollution, and we're paying respects today to a Puerto Rican icon, Walter Mercado. But first, the rest of your headlines.
Those devastating wildfires out west, all evacuation orders have now been lifted across Southern California, and thousands of people can now head home. Firefighters made a lot of progress battling the blaze on Sunday. It is now at least 70% contained. They are still watching for hotspots and winds that could whip up those flames, but certainly good news.
An Iranian official has just said his country is now operating 60 centrifuges to create nuclear material. That's twice as much as before and violates the nuclear deal Iran made with several countries around the world.
Sportswear company Under Armour this morning reporting better than expected profits in the most recent quarter. This comes amid reports it's facing investigations over its accounting practices.
The Patriots finally lost a game. They met their match in Baltimore, where the Ravens led for the entire game. Going into last night, the Patriots defense gave up an average of 8 points a game, but they gave up 37 against the Ravens. The final score, 37-20.
All right, we begin in Washington in the ongoing impeachment probe. 4 witnesses scheduled to appear today, but despite subpoenas, none expected to actually testify. So I want to bring in Karen Travers at the White House, and we have Catherine Faulders on Capitol Hill. Catherine, I just want to start with you. If you can just tell us exactly what we need to know. This is a lot to follow along with.
Yeah, so 4 White House officials were scheduled to show up here today for depositions behind closed doors. They were all subpoenaed for their testimony. 2 were scheduled for this morning, a couple later this afternoon. They aren't going to show up here. And the reason they're so significant, you see their names there. John Eisenberg, he is the deputy counsel. He's a lawyer in the White House. He was responsible, per our sources, from moving that call that the president had with the president of Ukraine to that secret server that we've been talking about. Michael Ellis, also in the counsel's office, and the other 2 that you see there, aides to Mick Mulvaney and OMB officials, the Office of Management and Budget. The reason that they were so significant, why the committee wanted to hear from them, is because they were involved in that aid. They would be able to answer more questions about why that aid was held up, Kimberly, but none of them expected to show up today.
Right, and Karen, in the meantime, President Trump is still pushing to reveal the whistleblower's identity. So what's the latest with that?
Speaking reporters here at the White House said that the whistleblower should be revealed. And Kimberly, the president, still very much keyed in on the identity of this person whose complaint is the center of the House Democrats' impeachment inquiry. It's what launched it. But there are many here in Washington who will say that the whistleblower does not matter anymore because you've had multiple officials go up onto Capitol Hill and testify behind closed doors under oath about the things that were described in the whistleblower complaint. These are people with firsthand information. The whistleblower, of course, has acknowledged that all that information they had in their complaint was secondhand.
And Karen, we're always interested in what people are asking about on your radio calls as they follow along as well. So what has the conversation been?
I think the question was about this surprise development over the weekend where the lawyer for the whistleblower said that his client would answer questions provided by House Republicans that didn't have to be cleared through the House Democrats, who, of course, Kimberly, are controlling the inquiry. These questions would then go to the whistleblower, which would then be returned in writing, under oath, and under a threat of perjury, essentially calling bluff there, the lawyer for the whistleblower. House Republicans over the weekend signaling that they were not going to accept this offer, and the president himself today, Kimberly, tweeted, "Written answers not acceptable." These are people who want to see the whistleblower up on Capitol Hill, taking questions there from lawmakers. A lot of this, though, is driven by that interest in having the whistleblower's identity revealed.
And Catherine, before we go, is there anything else that we should be watching out for this week?
Yeah, well, there are more officials that are scheduled to appear here for depositions behind closed doors. We already know that 2 of those, also officials for the Office of Management and Budget, will not be showing up here. So it's still to be determined who we see. Now, there's some witnesses who are coming back who we'll see more of on Capitol Hill. Fiona Hill, for example, the top Russia advisor. They're coming back just to review their transcripts of their previous depositions. The other thing that we could see is the release of those transcripts. They could come as soon as this week, and possibly next week we could be looking at some public hearings.
All right, Karen Travers at the White House and Catherine Falder's right there on Capitol Hill. Thank you guys for the latest. And we are going to move to the 2020 race. It's slimming down with Beto O'Rourke dropping out over the weekend. The remaining candidates working hard on the campaign trail in Iowa, where we find our campaign reporter, Sasha Pesnick. So, Sasha, I want to ask you, who is actually leading this race right now?
Hey, Kimberly. Well, TBD, we have a new poll out from ABC and Washington Post that shows Joe Biden firmly in the lead among registered voters, 28% to Warren's 23%, and Sanders coming in at 17% here. The thing is, there's a 4th person in this race that is really surging forth here. The only other candidate who's above 2%, Mayor Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana. He had a really strong showing at the Liberty and Justice dinner this week in Iowa. Thousands of fans in the stands rallying for him, and it was a really impressive moment for him, and we might see something more from him in the coming days.
Yeah, and so we know that Elizabeth Warren, she released her Medicare for All plan last week, but lots of criticism from the frontrunners.
That's right, Kimberly. She came out with this really sweeping plan, over $20 trillion in new federal spending. And it's something that a lot of people are really inspired by. Universal health care, everyone covered, costs going down. But a lot of her 2020 contenders out there criticizing her, some of them saying that she's being really overly optimistic. Joe Biden saying it's time to get real. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, he has his Medicare for All Who Want It plan, saying that it's not really the right path to take this country in, and that we might actually lose voters on the Democratic side who want more of a centrist candidate and don't want their health care to be taken away as they see it.
All right, so you spent the weekend in Iowa. What are the other takeaways from your time there?
You know, voters really want to see and meet their candidates here. They want to feel inspired by someone who not only has the plans and the big ideas, but also has the wherewithal to put their money where their mouth is here and make not just promises, but put meat on the table and meat on their plans.
All right, Sasha Pesnick right there in Iowa with the latest. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And guys, we're going to move overseas to a city grappling with dangerous polluted air. Now, some major city in China probably came to your mind, but New Delhi, India is experiencing nothing short of an air crisis. A BBC report even saying the pollution meters didn't have enough digits to accurately record the levels, but no one knows what that's actually like more than someone who actually lives there. So I want to bring in Sana Beg. She's a Delhi resident and a friend of mine, and she joins us on the phone right now. Sana, so glad you could talk to us today. You used to live in New York here with me, and so you have some level of comparison. Just how bad is it in Delhi right now?
Hi, Kim. Thanks for having me. Well, honestly, it's nothing like you can fathom if you're used to New York air. Actually, perhaps a better comparison would be to the California wildfires that are happening. So at their peak, I believe the air quality had reached unhealthy and hazardous levels, meaning anything above a 300 AQI level. And AQI is the air quality index, and there's a science behind how it's measured. And so in layman's terms, the lower the AQI, the better the air quality. So I was just looking. New York right now is in a 0 to 50 range, which is good. Parts of California during the worst part of the wildfires were between 300 and 400. I went to work this morning in Delhi with an AQI of 800. And this past weekend, the AQI was 1,300. That's more than what the air quality is right now with the wildfires in California.
That's insane. That's wild. So how does it affect your day-to-day? Like, what do you actually have to do? What are people doing when they wake up and go on about their work and all of their errands? How do they have to combat this?
Well, if you think about it, how much do you really think about the air that you breathe? You don't. You take it for granted. But here in Delhi, you can't take the air you breathe for granted, literally. So day to day, you're taking measures that no one should in this day and age. You're, looking at what's the best air purifier I can get. You're wearing masks outside. You're sealing your windows shut. You're not going for walks in the park. You're constantly almost obsessed about making sure that your air quality, at least indoors, because you're limited to indoors, is as clean as it can get. Because even with that, air purifiers are struggling. At its peak over the weekend, the air purifier we have at home wasn't even able to reach a healthy level because the air quality was so bad outside. It was able to bring it down significantly, but even indoors, it was at a dangerous level.
Wow, it's unbelievable. Do we know what's causing it to be so intense? Like, what's making this air so polluted?
Yeah, so I've been here a few years now, and it's at this time every year that things almost by routine get really ridiculously bad. So every winter, the wind speeds slow down, and there are farmers in neighboring states that are burning their leftover crops and making room for new harvest. And because they're burning their crops, the dirty air also settles over India's main cities, and that puts hundreds of millions at risk. And to make matters worse, it often coincides with a Hindu religious holiday called Diwali, during which part of the festivities are for people to have fireworks, which only adds to the already hazardous air quality. So both of those things together are a lethal mix at this time of year.
So, Sana, I know you have a family. Like, what are your concerns, moving forward with a baby and being in this sort of environment?
Honestly, it really makes you think about the quality of life and the extent to which you go for just, a job where I'm here, my husband's here, we're basically working here, but you really want to reconsider those options because on a daily basis you're reading reports about air pollution can cause permanent brain damage for children, or reports that, poisonous air is connected to millions of deaths of Indians already. It makes you really think about some of the choices. And me, along with many other people that live in this city, have had to think long and hard about, do we really need to be here? And a lot of us are exploring alternate options because there's no replacing your house.
Yeah, and just before we go, as you're exploring those options, is the government doing anything to try to make this better?
Well, India has really struggled to get in front of the pollution crisis. The Indian Prime Minister himself has stayed away from publicly making any statements about this. I believe the state government, the local government in New Delhi has now declared it a public health emergency, but really the only measures in place are issuing public advisories. Schools are shut down. They've halted some construction. They've planned to limit the number of vehicles. But really, to get to the heart of the problem, that still remains to be seen.
All right, Sana Beg, a Delhi resident right there in all of that air pollution. Thanks for joining us today, and try to stay safe. We appreciate it. All right, guys, so we're going to move to some news out of fast food giant McDonald's. The CEO, Steve Easterbrook, pushed out of the company after violating a policy by having a consensual relationship with an employee. And our Aaron Katersky joins me now with more details. Aaron, this sort of came out of nowhere. What do we know about this case?
We don't know much. It was just in a couple of lines, a release that announced a leadership change at the top of McDonald's, with Easterbrook out, the company said, because he had what was described as a consensual relationship with an employee. And obviously, when you're the CEO, everyone else is an underling. And so that was, according to McDonald's rules, an inappropriate relationship. Easterbrook did not fight it. He said, I had a lapse in judgment. It was a mistake, and time for him to move on.
Yeah, so you use that word consensual, and I was reading the New York Times report about this, and that consensual word is in the very first line, which means a lot in this era that we're living in. So what even led to this investigation?
That's what we also don't know, whether McDonald's had been looking at this for a while. They didn't really say how long this had been going on. Easterbrook is a divorced father of 3, so it wasn't as if this was an extramarital affair for the chief executive. The McDonald's simply said he violated the rules, and he was out. And it was almost just like that. And right away, they announced the ascension of a new chief executive, and McDonald's is going to try and move right past it.
Yeah, what do you think this means for the company going forward? I mean, is this a big shakeup, or is it just sort of like, okay, we're just going to smooth it out and go to someone else?
Well, undoubtedly, McDonald's hopes it's nice and smooth and that people will kind of forget about it and they'll just move on. But Easterbrook became a controversial figure, not for any relationship issues until most recently, but those fighting the fast food industry for a higher wage found Easterbrook to be a problem. We know the Fight for 15 campaign, the $15 minimum wage, had found him to be an obstacle and said that Easterbrook was part of the problem. And so their response to this was, well, the culture's been corrupt right from the top. And so they're certainly glad to see him go, and hopefully they believe they can have a better shot with new leadership at McDonald's.
As all of these fast food chains struggle in this economy now. All right, Aaron Katursky with the latest there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kimberly.
And guys, speaking of fast food, let's talk about Popeyes for a second, because people are still losing their minds over that fried chicken sandwich. If you remember, it made its debut in August, but quickly sold out. And now that it's back, pure mayhem, incredibly long lines, frustrated customers, fights, and some hilarious tweets. One tweet saying, I hope everyone working at Popeyes gets a raise or a bonus because, woo. So if you were in that line, you definitely know that it was a problem. And lots of other memes for days. So I normally never say this when someone is about to eat, but I think it's appropriate here. Be safe. All right, so we move to a story now that shows the power of weather. Imagine this: a big cargo ship stuck on some rocks in the Niagara Falls had not moved for over 100 years. But over the weekend, you see it there, a powerful storm changed that, and our Will Reeve has the latest. Will?
Kimberly, that hunk of metal behind me is known as the Iron Scow, a ship that has been stuck in place in the upper rapids of the Niagara River for over a century. It got stuck there in 1918. 2 men rescued off the boat, and then the ship stayed. No one knew the physics of it, how it stuck in place with those powerful rapids pounding at it day after day for 100 years. But it stayed exactly in place. It became a local tourist attraction. People came to see the Iron Scow just hanging out in the river very close to those famous Horseshoe Falls until Halloween night, when severe weather moved the ship closer to the edge of those falls. It still has hundreds of meters to go. There is still a chance that it will stay in its new place, flipped around and turned on its side, for days, weeks, maybe even 100 more years. Officials do not know, but they are monitoring the situation to make sure that if it does move, they are ready. Their plan is, if the ship goes over the falls, there are 2 scenarios. One, it would fall over directly to the rocks below, where it would be inaccessible to anyone trying to extricate it, so it would stay there. That would be its new resting place. Or it would move further down the river, whereupon officials would take it out of the water 101 years after it got stuck there in the first place. Kimberly?
All right, Will, kind of a fascinating story there. So now we're going to check in on the national forecast with our chief meteorologist, Ginger Z. Ginger?
Kimberly, burr. That's all I have to say. Seriously, had my husband put on a weighted blanket last night because I couldn't handle it. So that's where I'm at. I don't know where you are, but let's go ahead and talk about where the rest of the country is, because Franklinville, New York. Yep, that's more than 3 inches already fallen, up to 5 inches reported in western New York, which this isn't record. It's not early necessarily, but it's because we were so warm. Really much of the East Coast and definitely the Southeast. Wilmington, North Carolina, for example, had their warmest October on record. Raleigh, Charlotte, Greenville all had top 3 warmest. So when you talk about the freezing mark and staying there for a couple of mornings, that's why it's a big deal. Back to Huntsville, which was sub-freezing earlier this weekend. I'd love to tell you that it ends, but it doesn't. Look at that second Arctic blast coming in. By Saturday morning, the wind chill will be in the teens from Detroit back to Minneapolis, Chicago, New York City, Boston. Yuck. Okay, now I'm just being partial. I'm not supposed to do that. So let me go ahead and say, between all of that, there's a potential for flash flooding, especially in the Ozarks. There's going to be some heavy rain right through eastern Arkansas, or eastern Oklahoma into Arkansas and Missouri. And then it hits that cold air, and that becomes snow. So somewhere in northern Indiana, Ohio, western Pennsylvania, all the way through the Northeast, this is Friday, 5 a.m. If you have a flight, this will absolutely impact you, even if it ends up being all rain at the coast. And certainly if you're driving anywhere in New England or the Northeast. So something to look forward to. Kimberly.
Ginger, we're not ready. Oh my gosh, thank you for that. And today, guys, we're paying our respects to a Puerto Rican icon, Walter Mercado, a beloved astrologer and beacon of light in the Latino community, captured the attention of 120 million viewers a day. So he passed away this weekend in his late 80s. But before he died, he was filming an upcoming documentary by Emmy Award-winning director Christina Constantini, who joins us now. Christina, it's good to see you. The last time I saw you in Mexico City, we were talking about this documentary. You know, he was larger than life. What did he mean to you, and what did he represent to the Latino community?
You know, it's hard to understate Walter's cultural impact, or overstate his cultural impact. He reached 120 million people a day for almost 30 years, and he is deeply, deeply beloved. It's very difficult to explain the cultural significance of an astrologer to people who didn't grow up with him, but he is beloved. He would come into our living rooms every day, and he would preach messages of love and hope and inclusion. And, you know, for an immigrant community, for the Latino community, that means a lot. And so for me and for my co-director, Kareem Tapsh, and my producer, Alex Humero, it's been one of the greatest privileges of our lives to spend the last 2 years of his life with him. It's been a great honor. And he is just as wonderful in person as he was on television for those 30 years. And so we can't wait to share his story with more people.
Yeah, and for the people who may not be familiar with him, what do you think is the one thing that people should know about him?
Well, he was our Oprah, our Mr. Rogers, and our Liberace, and all combined in one person. And every day he signed off with a message of mucho, mucho amor. And that was his message in one word, was love. He preached love, and he preached hope to people who needed it most. And his legacy will live on for many, many, many years. He made us all better people.
Yeah, and I think one of the other fascinating things for a lot of people, this was the first time they were seeing a gender fluid man on television.
That's right. Yes. So Walter, he says, sometimes I can be very masculine, sometimes I can be very feminine. He has a very androgynous look. And for a man who was born in 1932, that's very unusual. So he was way ahead of his time. He showed up on TV every day wearing these fabulous capes, fabulous rings. He had amazing hair. And so he had this very singular look. And I think we loved him because of that. He was so himself at a time, in a place when not many people were doing what he was doing. And we love him because of it.
Yeah, so Christina, I want to ask you about the documentary, because I can sort of hear the emotion in your voice. You were working so closely with him before he passed. How did this documentary come about, and how do you feel knowing that your work will sort of be the final work on his life?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's a great privilege. Kareem and Alex and myself, we are 3 Latino filmmakers who all independently wanted to tell his story, because we understood growing up with him just how much he meant to our community. And so we actually found each other all trying to make this documentary, and we teamed up, and we tell the story of his good times and also his hard times. A lot of people don't know that Walter went through a very tough decade period of life, and he wanted to have this big comeback of sorts. And on the 50th anniversary of his first taping of his show, he had this amazing debut in Miami. And so it's the story of what that event was like, and preparing for that event and what it meant for him. And it was a very fitting tribute in his last months of life, that he was able to be with his public again and celebrate it again. I think we all, the 3 of us, could not love this man more. So it's been very special for us.
And now that he has passed away, does that change or shape, how you're telling the story? Are you guys finished with the documentary?
We actually finished the documentary on Friday, and he passed away on Saturday. So wow. It's So we're excited to share it. We have a lot of little things to do before it's released, but we wanted to tell the story to more people. I think, Latinos, we know the cultural significance of Walter, but I think for people who didn't grow up with him, it's kind of hard to explain how somebody so magnificent means so much to people. So we want to share his message. We want to share him. We want to share his love that he had for the world with an even wider group of people. So it will come out sometime early next year, we hope.
Amazing. Christina, just want to say thanks for joining us today, and incredible work, and we all can't wait to see it. And as you said, so everyone else can learn how amazing he was. And without a doubt, like Christina said, he's leaving a message of peace and love. So check out him saying it himself.
Y que reciban de mí siempre paz, mucha paz, pero sobre todo mucho, 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 mucho amor.
I love it. Peace and love. And guys, before we go, if you live in New York City, you know yesterday was Marathon Sunday, a huge event across the 5 boroughs. And needless to say, finishing a marathon in any way is a huge accomplishment. And so we want to congratulate one of our own for making it through. Our ABC News producer, Brendan Rand, made it through yesterday's marathon, and we're giving him the biggest shout out ever. Congratulations, Brendan. Such an accomplishment. All right, guys, continue to take care of yourselves, and if you're around, you can stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. and then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app. I'm Kimberly Brooks, and I'll see you tomorrow.
ABC News, straightforward.